Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 6 of The All, the first episode of 2016, and hopefully it'll be the worst episode of 2016, just because I like to make or I hope, I attempt at least, to make each episode a little bit better than the one before. So we're going to hopefully start from here and only get better. So that's my hope. What I'm going to do, not this week, but next week, I think I'm going to have that be our first themed episode. Yes, I've been talking and thinking about themed episodes quite a lot, and this theme I want to do early on because I think a lot of things branch off from it, and a lot of things will reference back to it. So I want to sort of do this theme episode to establish some of these themes that we're going to be getting back to quite a lot. But what theme is it? You will have to wait until next week to find out. That's just how it goes. All right, but we're going to roll right into this episode. This might be a shorter episode than usual, although, when I get into things, who knows how long I will talk, because sometimes I can just go off and just go in any number of directions. Today's episode is a bit eclectic, although we do have some sort of presidential related questions here, although there's not really a real theme to them or a real connection between them, so we're going to just go with it. And also, I've thought about these questions even less than I usually do. So, like, you're going to see the gears turn if they do turn. I can't guarantee that they will turn. They might just get stuck together. I might just not be able to process thoughts. So we're in for a ride together because I'm going to be sort of live figuring out my answers to these questions and topics. And you will either see, mental mastery, or you'll see a complete train wreck, or you might see something in between. All right, so let's get into it. We're going to start with a little bit of a fun question here. Okay. Didn't you used to be a brony? Have you renounced Bronydom? All right, that's an interesting question. First of all, for those of you who don't know what a brony is, a brony is a typically adult male fan of the cartoon show My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic. Now, the brony phenomenon started towards the end of 2010 and really took off in 2011. And I think around September of that year, I got on board with the whole thing. And, maybe on a future episode, I'll get into what a brony really is, what's the appeal of it, what's good about it, what's not so good about it. But needless to say, I got into it in September of 2011, and I don't consider myself a brony anymore because I haven't watched an episode of the show in over 2 years. But there was not really a moment where I just said, screw this or anything. And I don't really want to call myself an ex-brony or anything like that because I feel that even though I don't watch the show, I'm not against it, and I still have respect for the people who worked on it and all that stuff. It's because, I don't know, I feel like if I say I'm an ex-brony, that means the haters win, the bastards, the people who are always trying to put people down for liking something that's a little bit outside their target demographic, I guess. And, there's a lot of bigger points to this, too, because what My Little Pony was, as you know, is a franchise that originated in the 80s and has had, it's basically, it was what Transformers was for boys, or Mighty Morphin Power Rangers or something like that was for boys, My Little Pony was for girls. In a sense, it was a vehicle to sell toys. But just because something is commercial doesn't mean it's bad. And you know, the show had existed in many different incarnations throughout the decades leading up to Friendship is Magic. My sister had some early My Little Ponies as a little girl, as did a lot of little girls. So, you know, it's pretty innocuous, nothing too exciting about it, really, on the whole. At least as far as I know. Oh, let's not do this again. Stupid camera. But anyway, what ended up happening was in 2010, this new show called Friendship is Magic came out, which had a flash animation style, and it was sort of created by a woman called Lauren Faust, who had previously worked on Powerpuff Girls and Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. And she is a really sort of a smart and witty kind of person who basically was able to elevate what was essentially just a commercial, you know, I'm selling toys for girls, and turn it into an actual show that, while still being a show for little girls, had enough about it, you know, enough good about it, I would say, that it captured a bit of a what they call a periphery demographic. So I don't know, it just had a lot of you know, there was a like a mythology about it, and you know, just the characters were just really bright and colorful and just very fluid, and it just and all six, you know, in a lot of other shows like this, you'll have the main characters be pretty much interchangeable, but you had six main characters, the six main ponies, were all different, and they all had very distinct and recognizable personality traits. And, you know, it was interesting and kind of cool. And yes, the plots were very simplistic, and a lot of it was overly sugary, but in a strange way, in a very strange way, that became part of the appeal. And a bunch of grown men, even people who considered themselves manly men, started getting into it. And I think, you know, there's a larger social phenomenon here, but I think that for a lot of people, it just felt rebellious to get into this, because this show was something that everybody, like, everything about it was the antithesis of what we were always told that being manly was. And so people, I think, glommed onto it just because of that rebellious antics, and and the beautiful thing about it is it didn't involve anyone giving up, you know, their masculine habits in, you know, any other part of their life, you know. In fact, people turned it around and said this is the most manly thing ever, you know, and it was awesome. You know, one variation of a comment I used to see a lot on Friendship is Magic episodes was, "Man, I just had the most awesome mad night with my friends. We went to the gym, we pumped some iron while listening to heavy metal, we worked on cars, we watched a few action movies and swigged some beers, and then we all watched some episodes of My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic. Best mad night ever." And comments like that uh, were just all over. And the fact that, like, I don't know, anyone in the news or anything who tried to cover bronies were just so I just want to say, I don't want to say like hateful, but they were very dismissive. Like, they didn't really care about why it was happening. They just wanted to make fun of it. I think that drove a lot of people further into it, including me. I definitely liked the rebellious stuff. You know, I liked the value of being able to go up to people and say, "I like this. You know, what are you going to do about it?" And just enjoying their you know, their shock at my, you know, proclamation of a fandom of something that doesn't doesn't fit what people's image of somebody like me would be, you know? Because like a lot of people who were bronies were like me, you know? Guys who, you know, are football fans, for instance. Eagles, see, football fan, um, who, you know, like to work on cars. Not that I do, but like work on cars, go to the gym, you know, other have rugged manly beards and things, and but they like the show. It just, I think it challenged people and made them uncomfortable, and I think I like that a lot. Um, Now, I think the downfall of the Brony and the downfall of the whole cultural thing happened for several reasons. Number one, ultimately it was a fad, I think, and like any fad, it only has a shelf life of a couple of years. So I think in 2013 or around then, there was a large scale, just people started losing interest, just just because it is a fad, you know, and fads don't last forever. Um, and number two, the fact is, as good as the show can be, it is simplistic, and there's really just no getting around that. It's made for, you know, the 5 to 8 year old demographic, I think, and it has to be simplistic because it's for them. It's not for us. We just happen to like it. Um, and after a while, it's like, okay, you know, I want to move on to something that's a little bit more substantial. Not that there wasn't substance, like I said. You know, all the ponies had distinct personalities, but still, it was just too simple. And I think the third and biggest thing that doomed Bronydom was the fact that eventually, over time, the kind of people who became the poster childs for Bronyism, and possibly the majority of Bronies, are the kind of people that people expected to be all along, you know, basically man children. And I don't mean man children in the sense that like, you know, oh, I'm goofy, you know, I'm a little, there's the child in me. I mean like actual people who just can't cope with adult life and are just, you know, just a little off, you know, these people who just seem a little off and seem a little weird. I don't know if they were the majority of the bronies, oh, but they definitely became the poster child of the bronies. And I think once a lot of the more or less normal fans faded away, it was those people who remained. And the more that they remained, the more that they took over the image of what a brony was. So in 2011, 2012, being a brony was almost like a cool thing in a way. It was almost like a weird sort of counterculture thing. But in like 2013, 2014, it just became like this creepy thing. You know, it just turned. And just because something, you know, being a part of a certain fandom is creepy is not enough to keep me away. In fact, that would actually possibly be a draw for me because I am a that kind of rebel in my own dumbass way. However, I think for me personally, I just generally lost interest. Like, yeah, it's good, but it's just too simple and it just isn't, you know, the novelty factor after about 2 years was wearing off. So essentially, you know, that show still has my support. I'm never going to renounce the show, but I'm just never going to, you know, I don't say, I'm not going to say I'm never going to watch an episode again for nostalgia's sake or whatever, but it's unlikely that I'm ever going to, you know, sit down and really get into it again. It's just not something that I'm going to do. But, you know, if anyone is a brony out there or ever was, you know, more power to you. I support you. I was with you, and in many ways, I still am with you. And just the fact that I'm no longer a brony in the strictest sense doesn't mean that I am not still in spirit your brother. So just bro hoof to the screen. Why the hell not? All right. So that was a good way of getting into things, and literally every other question is political. So this was a very interesting way to begin the episode because it has nothing to do with anything else. Or does it? The show's called The All. Everything has to do with everything here. But anyway, the next topic. What do you think about presidential executive orders and the extent that they've been used recently? Now, this question comes in light of President Obama's push to take executive action on gun control. You know, he had his whole press conference where he, boo-hoo, cried and everything. And number one, I'm not going to speculate as to whether or not those tears were real or not. Ultimately, even if they were real, it's still stagecraft. It's still something he did to trigger an emotional response. And number two, emotional response. This is classic American liberalism, It goes for what feels good in the heart, and rather than what's actually going to do good out there in the world. Because basically what Obama's argument comes down to is we've lost so many of our kids to gun violence. Things are getting out of control. We have to do something with gun control. Like, it hits the heart, and everyone's like, oh my God, and they just fall right in line behind it. But, the efforts that he's trying to do will not only not help the problem, but will possibly make it worse. And the thing is, it's more important to the liberals to feel like they're doing the right thing rather than actually doing the right thing. But the point of all this is all of that is actually irrelevant to the question, because whether or not this is the right thing to do, it is still wrong to do it through executive action. It's wrong because it's unconstitutional. It's an overreach of power, the most recent of many that this president has had. And before you say anything, yes, George W. Bush also overused the executive orders, and yes, it was also wrong when he did it. Because we have a system that was put in place in our Constitution by our founding fathers. There is a way to get something into law, and it's not by imperial decree of the president. What you're supposed to do is have the law go through the two branches of Congress, and once it goes through the two branches of Congress, then the president will sign it, or he'll veto it. And if he vetoes it, it goes back to Congress, and if they have enough numbers, they can override that veto. So that, and on top of that, people could bring up the case to the Supreme Court to challenge the constitutionality of the law. So we have all these layers to make sure that it's not easy to pass laws, and they can't be rammed through by any one person or any one branch of government. Now, our founders created this system deliberately because they were very studied men. They researched things when they were making up the Constitution. They researched things all the way from the times of antiquity all up until contemporary times to see what ideas were out there, what had been tried, what worked, what didn't. And through all that careful study and research, they determined that this was the best thing they could come up with. They knew it wasn't perfect, but they knew it was pretty good, and it's gotten us very far over the last 200 years. It's been validated by our history, and it's actually been an example for the world to follow, and much of the world is following it, So, but now, and to a certain extent, I can understand it because executive orders, that is, because in this modern age, snap decisions are needed sometimes in a way that they weren't necessarily needed in the old days. You had the opportunity to, like, it would take a few days for the news to reach you, and then once you did something, it would take a few days for the result of that to go out there into the world. However, what we're talking about here is a law that's going to fundamentally change a facet of American society. And that isn't a snap decision, and that is something that has to be gone through this whole process, And we've had presidents recently, Obama foremost among them, who just lay down these imperial decrees, and it's very dangerous, and it's very against the idea of our republic for an executive to be like, well, Congress isn't going to do what I want, so I'm going to do it myself. No, you can't do that. That's not how our system is set up. That's against the Constitution. And frankly, it might even be impeachable. I don't know for certain. I'm not really an expert on that. And speaking of things I'm not an expert on, now what I'm about to say, keep in mind, I don't really know this for certain, but I have the feeling that the executive order, when it was originally conceived, was for a much smaller purpose. Like, it was basically housekeeping, to shuffle the deck within the administration and their, the executive offices that come out of it. I kind of feel that it was sort of for the bureaucracy for that, and it's sort of been expanded into something that it's not, or was never intended to be. I could be completely wrong about that, but that's just sort of the feeling that I get. And Obama has really turned it into a system of imperial decrees. I mean, certainly Bush did it to a certain extent, but I think just the reach of what Obama is trying to do here and in many other cases is far beyond the reach of the presidency, and we have 1 year and 13 days of Obama left to go, and hopefully they're not going to be as ugly as they seem like they're going to be. So basically, Obama can't do this, but he's going to, and he's going to get away with it at least for another year until the next president comes in, because no one's challenging this guy. Oh, you see there's our special guest once again. Every episode this guest has to appear. Alright, we are going to move right along to the next question. Alright. Now, here we go. What is the difference between a melting pot and multiculturalism? Now, this is a fun question, and I don't know how deep we'll get into this, but like I said in a previous episode, we lay the foundations in some episodes and dig deeper in future episodes. But, okay. Basically, America has grown from a small colonial nation of 3 million people to a superpower of 300 million people, not because we bred like rabbits during that time. That certainly counts for some of it, but obviously not all of it. But we've grown that large because we have had immigration, and we have had the melting pot throughout our history. At various times in our history, different groups came in, and they all contributed something to us, So, what is a melting pot, and what is multiculturalism? Basically, what a melting pot is when immigrants come to this country, they essentially become new people when they come here. The beautiful thing about America, as opposed to almost any other country in the world, and we did talk about this last time, but it bears repeating, one of the best things about America is that you can come to America from anywhere in the world, and you can become an American. You can be a person who grew up in a different country, you come here, you take the citizenship test, you sort of understand American civic values, and once you do so, you, the immigrant, are as much of an American as I am, somebody whose relatives have been here for the most part since the beginning, or near the beginning anyway. And but that doesn't make me more American than you. It's a wonderful thing. And the thing is, when people come into this country, what they traditionally are supposed to do is not surrender their identity. That's not what we're asking them to do, but just to assimilate to the culture of America, to sort of become part of us. And you know what is interesting about that? Not only do immigrants become part of us, but all of us become just a little bit more like them, When something melts into the pot, the rest of the things that were already in the pot take on the flavor of that new thing that has been melted. So basically, it's a win-win scenario because the immigrant gets to live in a much better place when they come to America. They get to lose the baggage of their the nation they came from and whatever conflicts were going on there because they're no longer their problem. They're now Americans. And on the other hand, America benefits because of the richness of the culture and traditions of the people who are coming into the country. As an example, I'm pretty sure my English and German ancestors did not eat, tacos or spaghetti or like lo mein or, or anything like that. But I do. It's part of my native American diet. And why is that? Because various groups over the generations have immigrated to America, and in doing so, their a lot facets of their culture have become American culture. So, eating tacos or pasta to me as an American is just as natural as eating, I don't know, a shepherd's pie or whatever the my English ancestors would have eaten. It's just as natural to me because what those immigrants have brought have been assimilated to me. Now, in contrast, what is multiculturalism? Multiculturalism is the idea that various people from various places can bring themselves and their culture over, and those cultures can remain intact side by side with one another, and there's no judgment on which culture is better. Everyone gets to stay within their own culture, and it's like a mosaic or like a stew rather than a melting pot. And on the surface, that sounds very like, yay, we can all live together and everything. But it's actually very, very, very bad. It's very insidious, and it's very wrong for so many reasons. And we can't even get into all of them today. But number one, a lot of these cultures, not only, they carry the baggage with them. Like, let's say Group A and Group B were fighting each other back in their, shithole homelands, and in a melting pot society, they can leave those shitholes and become good Americans, just like everyone else. But in a multicultural society, they are still those people. They are still that culture. And if both these groups come together, they're just going to be clashing over here. And yes, I know that still does happen in America and always has. Melting pots are not perfect, obviously, and it takes a while for things to melt, even if they do melt. But in a multicultural society, those things never go away. They just linger. And instead of raising your children to be Americans, you raise your children to be, I don't know, Pakistanis or Egyptians or like Frenchmen or whatever. You keep your you put your heritage above your the nation that you now live in, and so this perpetuates through generations. So basically, instead of making people into new nationals, you just have foreign elements perpetuating themselves in your country. And I don't even need to say why that's not good for your country. That pretty much explains itself. Mm, but there's still more to it. Um, Cultures that all have a similar set of values, it is much easier and it's much safer to live in one of those cultures because people generally know what is expected of them, and they generally know what is considered right and wrong in those cultures. And of course, there's going to be violators of that. There's going to be people who break that social compact, but they're going to be easy to spot and they're going to be easy to identify. However, in a multicultural society, what might be perfectly fine in one culture might be deeply offensive in another, and what might be a severe offense in another culture might be completely fine to someone else. And a lot of times, people will come over from these other cultures where they'll think they'll see things in their host countries, that are appalling to them. And in a melting pot society would be like, well, you don't have to like it, but this is our culture, so you have to accept it. You can't try to destroy it. But in a multicultural society, you can hate it, and you are no more, by definition, you are no more right or wrong than anyone else. The example I think of is, European and American girls wearing miniskirts and dressing like they like to dress is appalling and abhorrent to most Muslims. And in a melting pot society, they would have to just not, they'd have to keep that to themselves. To just be like, well, I don't like it, but I can't do anything about it. But in Europe especially, assaults are increasing, like areas that were once safe are no longer safe. On New Year's Day, there were these squads of young men, these so-called refugees, running amok in German cities, just molesting and harassing and raping German women, you know, in this country that was nice enough to bring them in. So it's really appalling. But the thing is, in a multicultural society, they're no less wrong for being offended that a woman is not covered in a, whatever it's called. That point of view is no more wrong than our point of view, which is people can basically dress how they want. We do have some guidelines, of course, but we generally permit people to dress who they want, to just express themselves, and because it's a free society, people can do things like that. We're not beholden to these really ancient laws of Islam or anything like that. So, and I think the biggest and final flaw with multiculturalism is its cultural relativism. As I said, it's the idea that all cultural values are equal. They're just different points of view. No one is more or less valid. Well, here's the thing. That's wrong because Western values are superior to Islamic values, to Russian values, to Chinese values, to African tribal values, to Indian caste culture values. They are vastly superior to all those, and we aren't just saying that because we are Western. We're saying that because look at the evidence. Look at how much life has improved, not just for us in the West, but for people all across the world because of our values. We've raised the life expectancy in some countries to 80 years. We have great health, great education. You can walk around most places without worrying about getting shot or robbed or mugged. You know, we have a culture where the weaker among us, the old, the disabled, the children, the women are protected. It's considered an egregious sin to take advantage of one of those people, and you're expected as a man to protect those people. And just the ideas of individual liberty, of individual property. You aren't subject to the king, you aren't subject to the crown, or to the state, or to a priesthood, or anything like that. You're your own person. You have the choice to do what you want, but you also have the responsibility of having the choice to do what you want. All these things are what make Western culture superior, and it's not just me saying that. It's provable. It's been true throughout history. We've seen it, and we have to defend it. I'm not saying people from non-Western countries can't come to Western countries. On the contrary, there are a lot of countries out there that were not Western and still aren't that Western. Take Filipinos, for instance. The Philippines is a East Asian country that was really kept in the Dark Ages by the Spanish up until we liberated them in 1898. But I've known many Filipino people, and they are some of the hardest working people that I've ever known. And this is, they really haven't bought into the victim mentality that a lot of other groups have bought into. And it just comes to show that people can come from non-Western cultures and embrace a Western lifestyle without letting go of their own style. I mean, these Filipino people I knew, they still made Filipino dishes. They still talked to each other in Tagalog, I think is their language. They still did all these things, but they were Americans. They were as American as I am. Even if they had accents, even if they didn't have the same face as me, I still consider them Americans, and I knew that I could count on them to do, more or less the right thing in situations that I myself would find myself in. So there's no reason why any of these groups, any person from any culture, can't become, citizens of America or any other country that has this melting pot ideology. I mean, Steve Jobs comes from Syrian ancestry, at least partial, but he was able to, he invented a lot of modern America, with everything that Apple's done, So this is why the melting pot fails, or the melting pot succeeds and multiculturalism fails, because Western civilization is better, and we are only enriched by everything that everyone's brought. The Irish, the Italians, the Jews, the Chinese, the Japanese, any group that you can name has enriched our culture by coming here and adding to it. And I think it's wonderful, and it's only strengthened us, and it's great. Whereas multiculturalism is just, once again, dividing people into camps, keeping them in those camps, saying, oh, you might live in France, but you were born Algerian, and you'll always be an Algerian. You'll always be a foreigner in this country. And they wonder why people riot, and they wonder why people flip out. I mean, it's so bloody obvious, It is so ridiculous. Multiculturalism is an idea that has to die, and has to die fast. The American idea of the melting pot has worked for so many decades, for so many generations. Ow. Ow, that hurt. It's breaking down a bit now, but it's still, the idea is still strong in this country, and we need to export this idea like mad. Not, we need to export this idea like mad to Canada, to England, to France, to Germany. We have to do this before it's too late, or else, these countries are just going to be bogged down in so many foreign elements that don't consider themselves part of their new country, And it's going to be a disaster, an absolute unmitigated disaster. So that's why multiculturalism sucks, and Melting Pot is thumbs up. All right, we are moving right along to our next question. Okay. Next question is, what do you think about the liberal argument that being colorblind is actually racist? And to frame this question in the correct context, I am actually going to read a quote that a quote from one of my Facebook friends. You know, one of these ultra liberal SJW types. You know, uh, one of these guys. You know, college student, like 19 years old, thinks he knows everything. I'm going to read you a comment that he wrote because I think that this is the perfect comment to launch this sort of discussion. So here we go. Oh, and his comment, and me quoting him begins with him quoting the straw man he's setting up, I guess. So his quote is as follows: "I don't see race, I only see the human race. While this may sound revolutionary, so-called color blindness is actually part of the problem. Not seeing race is simply a lazy coded phase for deliberately ignoring the lingering elements of racism that actually need to be fixed and reinforces the privilege of being able to bypass the negative effects of racism in the first place. As the saying goes, you can't erase what you cannot face." So that's what my Facebook friend said, and there's so many things in there that that immediately jump out. You know, the word privilege is in there for sure, and we have something about coded phrases. You know, we say one thing, but we really mean the other. We have the implication that institutional racism is still a not just a thing, but a big thing in America. And overall, we have the notion that um, ignoring race is racist. Now, first of all, let's start with that because that is the stupidest, most backwards thing that I think that I've had to encounter recently. It's like ignoring race is the literal antithesis of racism. You know, what did Martin Luther King say? What did Martin Luther King say? He said, "I want to live in a world where my children are judged not on the color of their skin, but on the content of their character." And what you are basically saying is, no, we have to judge people on the color of their skin because it's a different experience for black people. It's a different history. It's a different thing. It's a different struggle and all that stuff. And while there might be some elements of truth to that, ultimately, people are individuals, and people are not black Americans or white Americans. They are Americans who happen to be black or white or have brown hair or have green eyes or have, like, I don't know, broad shoulders, narrow shoulders, whatever. It's just like another element of a person that should be no more or less important than any other features of a person. It's like, you know, at this point you might as well say people who have a shoe size 13 don't understand the struggle of a person with a shoe size 7 or something like that. You know, it makes as much sense, really. Um, Now, yes, I know that there was a history of legitimate racism in this country. You know, the era of Jim Crow is still within living memory for several, you know, many elderly people in this country. But the thing is, we as a society, as a culture, as a group, have struggled painfully over the last couple of centuries to eliminate racism from our society. We haven't been trying to maintain it. We have been trying to root it out, and we have been so successful at this. I mean, I know this from first-hand experience. when there is a black person who is, you know, among white people, let's say, that black person is just one of the guys. He is not, I don't think about him any differently because he's black. I treat him the same way that I treat a white person. It's like, okay, if this person seems to be a good and decent person, I'm going to, get along with this person. I'm going to like him. I'm going to trust him. If this person is a douchebag, I'm not going to like or trust this person. It doesn't matter whether that person is white or black. There are several black people who work at my current workplace who are very good workers. There are several white people who are very good workers. There are several white people who are very bad workers. And I would, you know, if I had the choice of hiring a good black worker or a mediocre white worker, if I was a boss, of course I would hire the good black worker over the mediocre white worker 10 times out of 10. I would also hire the good white worker over the mediocre black worker 10 times out of 10 also. It doesn't matter. Skin color doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. It's a red herring. But getting back to this thing, what you are saying in this comment, Mr. Ultra-liberal guy, is that basically we still have institutional racism, and by me saying I don't care whether you're black or white, I'm perpetuating it. I'm apparently, by me saying I value a hardworking black person just as well as I value a hardworking white person, by me saying that, apparently, according to this guy, I'm perpetuating racism. I'm keeping black people down somehow. So I think the underlying argument of what this guy is saying is that because of the racism of the past, because of legitimate things like Jim Crow and redlining in northern cities and all that, black people are still not are still behind white people, and they need an artificial boost up, basically. What that means is doing things like hiring the mediocre black person over the good white person. It means things like lowering test scores or lowering entrance requirements for black people, but not for white. And it means things like, giving subsidies to black businesses and things like that over white businesses or whatever. And all this stuff is quite apart from being helpful. This is actually a really racist way to think. If you support these things, you are really a disgusting, disgusting racist, and you should be ashamed of yourself. And my only question to you, Mr. Facebook friend, is why do you hate black people so much? Why don't you think that they are as smart or as hardworking or as talented or as good as white people, that they need all these crutches to be able to get by in the world? Why do you think they are so inferior to us that we need to artificially favor them whenever we can because they can't do it on their own? That is absurd. I know plenty of black people who have come from really rough situations, have come from poverty, have come from just destroyed, awful families, who have, through the virtue of, having a good attitude and hard work, managed to make good lives for themselves. One of the richest people I know is a black guy. Like, every other day, he's posting pictures of, like, a fancy dinner he ate in Prague or, like, Dubai or something. He's traveling the world. And, I don't know this guy's family background, but he certainly is black as you can be. So, the existence of these people disproves your racist ideology. They prove that black people, when given the same opportunities as white people, can thrive, that they can do just as well as white people. And the thing is, when you give people an unfair advantage, when you just give them handouts, when you make things artificially easier for them, you're not doing them a favor. You are just pushing them through lives, and they know it too. They know they're getting by because you're being easy on them, and they're not going to appreciate you for it. They're going to resent it, and rightfully so. You damn racist. You've kept black people largely in the ghettos through these crutches that you've put on them. There have been people who have been oppressed much more recently than black people have. I mean, just think about how badly Irish or Italians were treated in this country not that long ago. Do you remember that there were signs on doors that said no Irish need apply? This was as late as the 1910s, if not even later. Italians were seen as all gangsters, all mobsters, and all that around the same time. This is after slavery ended. But these people managed to be just as successful as anyone else, if not more so in some cases. One of the proudest, and this is going back to the melting pot thing too, by the way, one of the most proudest and well-known business owners in the area is a second-generation Italian American living in Philly who runs Gino's Steaks. He posted a sign in his window that said, "You're in America, speak English," at this very famous cheesesteak place, and there was uproar over it. And that's that's a topic for a different day. But the point is, what he said was, "Hey, look, I'm not saying I'm going to turn away anyone who doesn't speak English, but this is the language we all use. This is, if you want to get your order done accurately, it's better to speak in a language that we all understand. Hey, my parents came from Italy, and they didn't speak any English. They learned English, and they taught English to me. And now I'm speaking English, and I think that you should too." Now that is the right attitude. And it's attitudes like that that cause Italians and Irish to become, part of the very fabric of America. I mean, hell, I had Italian food the other day. And it's part of my native diet now, because it's been assimilated into me, because it's been assimilated into America. But we're getting away from the black thing, because the point of all this is a lot of these people have been slavery ended in 1865. Yes, Jim Crow did linger for a while longer, and so did things like redlining. As recently as the 50s, black people could not buy houses in a place like Levittown, which is up here in Pennsylvania. So sure, as late as the 50s and 60s, there was still institutionalized racism against black people. But we have made tremendous strides since then. That's generations in the past already. And there have been groups that have been here shorter. There are groups that have been through much worse. Not just in America, but around the world. I mean, look at Israel. Look at how well Israel is doing. That was a country basically created out of nothing from a population of people who half of everybody died in World War II. I mean, there are only about 14 million Jews in the world, and 6 million of them died in World War II. That's almost half. But they managed to pick themselves up and create one of, out of nothing, surrounded by hostiles, they were able to create one of the most prosperous Western societies that you'll find. And they did this in 60 years, 60 years. Hell, it was already off to a good start almost as soon as it was founded. So you can't tell me that black people are inferior to Italians, to Irish, and to Israelis, and any other group that has been through this. Or my example of the Filipinos before. That's a country that was really left in the dark ages by the Spanish, like I said. And they're, when they come over here, they do great. So, are you really saying that black people are not able to keep up with that? Because if you are, then you, my good liberal friend from Facebook, are a disgusting racist, and you have to be deeply ashamed of yourself. Because I believe that black people can do anything that a white person or an Asian person or a Hispanic person can do, you know? And they don't need standards lowered for them. They don't need to be accepted for things that they're not capable of doing. You know, they are just as good as anyone else, and they don't need to be babied or coddled. And it's your people, meaning liberals, and your policies that have kept them where they have been since the 60s. You know, they were on the track. They were on the right track at the time. But you just look at just how destroyed these black neighborhoods and black communities are. You know, all the fatherless homes, all the crime, all the drugs, all the dependency. You know, that's because you told them basically, you know, you aren't your group isn't the way you are because of anything other than because you've been screwed over. So you just sit tight. We don't care what you do, but we're going to run through and we're going to legally pillage through the law. We are going to legally pillage the big white man, you know, who's kept you down all these years, you know. Never mind that, you know, we basically built the society that everyone is enjoying so much, with the help of course, every group that's entered and assimilated into American society. Never mind that we've built all this, but yeah, apparently it's like, oh, you know, America was built on the backs of slaves. Well, you know, for one, there's so many things wrong with that statement, but I don't know if I'm going to even get into all that now because I could spend so much time on this topic. But, you know, number one, no, it wasn't. It was only the plantation system of the South that was built on slavery. Number two, that system was destroyed in the Civil War completely and utterly. And number three, that was 150 years ago. I don't have to expand on any of those points. It's very obvious, very self-obvious. You people, you liberals who support this kind of stuff, disgust me. You're horrible racists. And my deepest wish, one of the things that I want to see happen in America is I want an awakening in black culture. I want an awakening among black people. It's like, what the hell are we doing? Why are we letting these assholes keep us down? You know what? We're going to go out and we're going to make something of ourselves. We're going to prove that we can do it just as well, if not better, than anyone else. You know, and they're going to do it. And I believe once they decide to do it, they're going to do it. And you know why? Because they're just as capable as anyone else. Absolutely, without a doubt, full stop, that's it. All right, we knocked that one out of the park. We killed that one. And we are going to roll right along to the next question. Some presidential election related questions as I promised. Okay. It's like how, all right, here's a question. How do you pair your support of Ted Cruz with the fact that he most likely disapproves of your atheism and just about every facet of your life? That's an interesting question because on the surface, it doesn't seem like I'm the kind of person who would be a Ted Cruz supporter, you know? I'm an atheist. I have a big potty mouth. I'm a heavy drinker. You know, I generally lead a lifestyle that is completely unchristian in just about every way. I tried looking up atheist for Ted Cruz on Google. I couldn't find any results for it. You know, generally, it's not something that goes together. However, here's what I think happens. I believe that Ted Cruz is the best person to protect my rights to be the atheist, the heavy drinker, all the debauchery, all that bullshit. He's the one person who's going to protect my rights to do that, even though he, as a person, doesn't agree with any of that. And why do I say that? Because he, more than any other candidate, believes in the Constitution, in protecting the Constitution, and protecting the country that that harbors these values, constitutional values. So it is true that Ted Cruz probably doesn't approve of most aspects of my lifestyle. Hell, if I met Ted Cruz in person, he might not even like me at all. He might just think I suck. And that's okay. I am completely okay with it. Because you know why? Because as a constitutionalist, he understands that it's my right to be how I am, and it's his right to be how he is, and it's everyone else's right to be how they are too. And I think it was the philosopher Voltaire who said, I disagree with what you say, but I will fight to the death for your right to say it. And I believe that Ted Cruz is that kind of person. And I believe even though he and I are very different people and live very different lives and support very different lifestyles, I still think he is going to protect my liberties to do and be who I want to be. I firmly believe that, and if it turns out that he isn't, if I find some evidence that he's not, then I will change my support. I will support somebody else. But until that day comes, I'm still going to stand by him. I still think that he is a good man. I think that he's a strong and capable leader. And keep in mind, we need a president who's going to defend America because, even somebody who agrees with me, if they can't keep America safe, it's not going to matter because I'm not going to have the right and the ability to be who I want to be and do what I want to do anymore. So even if a person is a little bit off from what I would think is the kind of person that I would want, I would vote for that person more if I knew or if I had a good feeling that they were going to keep the country safe, And Ted Cruz will do this. I believe that once he's in office, ISIS has maybe 2 months to live. I think that he's going to crush them. He's going to obliterate them. None of this, little ding, 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 pinprick airspace strikes. We're going to contain them, none of that bullshit. He's going to, bam, blow them up. I believe that's what he's going to do. I also believe he's going to get rid of all his executive orders. He's also hopefully going to be able to do something about, all these regulations and taxes that have just caused everything to skyrocket in price, and by doing so, make the market a lot more freer and allow me to have an easier access to doing the things that I want to do. So yeah, that's how I parsed my support of Ted Cruz with my very un-Ted Cruz-like lifestyle and personality. I think it's not too hard to understand. All right. So, next question. You mentioned that you're warming up to Donald Trump. Okay, I want to be very careful with this one because I'm not a Trump supporter, but my opinion of him has improved since I first mentioned him on this show a couple weeks ago. And I'm going to admit right off the bat that at least part of it comes from being a rebel. But a lot of it does come from actual, genuine, honest reasons. Number one, I was just talking about how Ted Cruz would keep America safe. I believe Donald Trump would as well. I believe Donald Trump has the courage to stand up to Putin and to stand up to any of these other thugs that lead into any of these other shitty countries out there and stick it to them. I firmly believe that Putin met, when he saw Obama face to face at some conference or whatever at the beginning of Obama's presidency, he looked Obama in the eye and he got the measure of the man. And Putin said, this man is not going to stop me. Right in the same way that Hitler looked into the eyes of the British and the French leaders of his day and came to the same conclusion. So good old Putin bided his time until Obama was reelected, and then he did his thing, the Crimea in the east of Ukraine. Now they're getting frisky in Georgia once again. I even heard rumors that Kazakhstan might be next on the, chopping block. The Baltic countries are scared shitless. Poland's afraid. It's kind of it's getting a little bit scary over there. And not only is Obama not helping, but he's deliberately sabotaging these effects. He basically, um, he went and like took a missile system out of Poland or something. But anyway, this is getting a little bit off the point of Trump. I don't think Trump would have done any of these things. To be honest, I don't think any of the Republican candidates would have done any of these things, with the possible exception of Rand Paul, because who knows, what his isolationism would lead to. But I think Donald Trump would would be firm on this. If Vladimir Putin had met Donald Trump instead of Obama and looked into Donald Trump's eyes and got the measure of that man, Putin would have been like, this man is the real deal. I'm not going to get away with this man. If Donald Trump had been president instead of Obama, Crimea would still have Ukrainian flags flying over it today, and eastern Ukraine would not be a war zone. That jetliner that was shot down would still be flying today. Those hundreds of Dutchmen and Australians and Malaysians who died would still be living their lives, and 5,000 or more Ukrainians who are now dead in the ground, they would have been alive and kicking around today if we had had Donald Trump or Ted Cruz, especially Ted Cruz, but also Donald Trump as president. Now, one thing I like about Trump is just his brutal honesty and his ability and his willingness to just completely bypass any kind of political correctness or any of that bullshit that all the other Republican candidates throughout history have seemingly fallen before. And it's such a beautiful thing, and the press is screaming about it. It's like, it's just like, what I'm reminded of for some reason just now, Terminator 2, the Terminator that's basically made of liquid metal and can take whatever form it wants. When it finally ends up in the pit of molten metal, like, it's just screaming out, and it's like melting, and it's trying to like form its head, and then the head melts, and another head tries to form, and it melts. That's what Donald Trump is doing to the media. They don't play his game, so they are trying to lynch him over their airwaves. And it's amazing because most people, they're used to people whenever that happens to them, whenever anyone goes against the media and the media tries to lynch them, it hurts the candidate so much that they come groveling back. But Donald Trump, he does not do that. He just completely brushes it off, and it enrages the media because they've never had this happen to them before. They've never had somebody who just, basically, Donald Trump has told us that the emperor has no clothes, and the media is furious, because we're supposed to think of them as these purveyors of news, these directors of the culture. But, Donald Trump's like, you have no power. You have no real power. You have no power over me. And I think a Donald Trump presidency would do wonders to just break that power. I really think it would. I mean, to a certain degree, Cruz would too, of course, because he had that moment at the Republican debate that one time where he said the thing to CNN, I think it was, or maybe it was CNBC, where he basically had the same message. But I think Trump's the one person who could do it consistently, and it's almost enough to make me think that his other weirdness is overlookable, almost. But I'm still going for Mr. Cruz then, because I just don't think. Well, Mr. Donald, he is. One thing I gotta give him credit for is he is a man of principles. The problem is those principles basically are entirely self-aggrandizing, which is completely fine and admirable for a private citizen. However, we want someone as a president who puts the needs of the country first. And I believe Donald Trump will do that to a point, but I don't know. The thing about Donald Trump is I don't know what he really believes, what his real political views are, because he's changed his stated opinion so many times throughout his political career or his life, his public life, which has gone back to the 80s at least. So it's hard to know where the man really stands. And that's what worries me, because a lot of times he says things that sound great and sound strong, and but then he'll say something like, "Oh, we should shut the internet down to prevent this from happening." It's like, okay, you're insane if you really believe that, and so it's really questionable what he actually believes in. But one thing I will say about Donald Trump, and more accurately about Trump haters, is that the level of viciousness I've seen directed towards Trump and towards anyone who supports Trump is beyond anything I've seen for any other candidate in my lifetime that I can remember. I mean, he gets compared to the worst elements of society. He gets called, people basically openly call him a fascist and any variation of that. And it's just astounding. They drag him through the mud. And the beautiful thing about Trump is that it doesn't stop him. It doesn't bother him. But it's just really sickening to me just how much, like every time I go onto Facebook, there are a bunch of people who are basically, if this level of hate was directed towards Obama, there would be so many cries of racism and all these other things, but this is just, he's called just all these memes popping up, all these statements. Some of them are joking, but they're very malicious jokes, and but a lot of them are entirely serious. It's like, oh, this guy's, terrible, and then you get these stupid things like in the UK now, there's like a petition to keep him out of the country or something like that, and people are, a college that gave him an honorary degree a few years ago has rescinded it, and these various groups are calling for this or that, and people are comparing him to, past villains like Hitler or whatever. It's amazing. It's astounding. And I almost want Donald Trump to be president just to shut those people up. Well, not to shut them up, they'll be louder than ever when he's president, but just to spite them. I am so tired of these people. And these people are the same people who have been trying to shove Bernie Sanders down my throat for the past year, by the way. So I almost want Donald Trump to be president just for that reason. But ultimately, at the end of the day, Ted Cruz will do everything that Donald Trump can do and more, and he'll do it better. And he'll rile up those people equally. I mean, very slowly, people are starting to wake up to Ted Cruz, and I knew this was a strategy the whole time. It's like a slingshot maneuver. Like in NASCAR. Yes, I'm going to make a NASCAR metaphor. You might have one car driving behind the other to reduce the drag, and then I forget exactly how it happens, but there is a move where the car in the back slingshots and goes to the front. And basically, Cruz is slingshotting right around Donald Trump, where he's going to. I believe it. I believe by March we'll have candidate Cruz. And by the way, I got that metaphor from Talladega Nights, the Ballad of Ricky Bobby, which is an actually good movie, by the way. But yeah, I think that's what what Ted Cruz is going to do. But even if he doesn't make it all the way in front of Trump, I still think Trump would make a much better president than most people think, and he would certainly make a better president than either Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders. And he will have my full-throated support if he does win the nomination, absolutely. But I still would rather have Ted Cruz. Absolutely. And I still think that we will have Ted Cruz. I still think that he will be our president. All right. One last big topic for tonight, and it's also presidential related. Who would be a more dangerous president? Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders? Now, I've changed my opinion on this recently because I've always maintained that I have a certain level of respect for Bernie Sanders just because he honestly believes what he says. You know, he is a man who has a set of core beliefs. They might be socialist and backwards and red as all hell, but at least they are a belief system, and he is honest about it and supports it. Whereas Hillary doesn't, as far as I can tell, she doesn't believe in anything, and she is, I don't want to sound like a Republican bot or anything by repeating this, but she really is a crook. She and her husband have had a long trail of shady stuff going all the way back to the 70s. Not just to the 90s, but all the way back throughout their entire lives doing this kind of thing. But the most recent and the most egregious of them all is her time as Secretary of State. This email scandal is no small thing. It's no whoopsie, these emails disappeared. Nixon was screwed over 18 minutes of tape that was missing. Whereas Clinton has apparently gotten away with months and months of missing records. And what were in those records? Well, there's a lot of people saying, and I think there's a lot of truth to this, that she was running she was running this State Department as a private arm of the Clinton Fund or the Clinton Foundation, and she was trading favors for donations and for influence. And if that is what she was doing, then that is treason, and she deserves to be, I don't know if I'll say hung, but I will at least say in an orange jumpsuit in a cell, if that turns out what she is doing. I'm not saying it's certain. I'm just saying it's a real possibility, and it has to be looked into, and the fact that it's not being looked into is a crime. So yes, Hillary Clinton would be a very dangerous president, someone who believes in nothing but her own power. However, Bernie seems on the surface to be a decent, nice guy, says what he believes what he says, and while his policies would be pretty disastrous for the country, at least he believes in something and won't sell us out to like some enemy somewhere, might sell us out to like wacko Black Lives Matter people, but at least he won't sell us out to our enemies or something, However, I am getting really, really disturbed by Bernie people. Not just him, but his followers. Number one, a person who truly believes what they're saying, when what they're saying is so wrong, is much more dangerous than somebody who's just playing the system. So, already Bernie is looking pretty dangerous. But number two, his supporters are the most rabid supporters I've seen since Ron Paul, and worse. And here's the thing about Ron Paul supporters. They're very rabid supporters of Ron Paul, but what they believed in was libertarianism. Leave me alone, The Bernie people believe in something entirely the opposite of that. They believe in social democracy. They believe in democratic socialism. They want to, you listen to the language that Bernie uses. going at, wanting to go after the banks, going after big business, going after the one percenters. Basically, Bernie Sanders is essentially a modern day pirate. He's the captain of a pirate ship, and all these Bernie people are riding it along with him, and they're going to raid. Instead of, going out and getting jobs and building something, they're going to go raid business. They're going to raid the private sector, and they are going to raid that stuff and give it to themselves and to their cronies and all the people that they've promised it to for support. Remember what I said before about entitlements and keeping people in the ghetto and all that stuff? This is what this all comes down to. It's like, oh, vote for us. We're going to pillage the bastards and give all this stuff to you, And he's going to leave this country in a burning wreck if he does this. Business is going to flee this country. It's already been fleeing, but it's going to really flee this country. And also, I'm really, really concerned about Bernie people because they, almost every other person, even Obama people from 2008, were much more subtle and subdued in the way that they endorsed their candidates. But Bernie people get right up in your face. I can't scroll through Facebook without seeing a deluge of Bernie fans. And keep in mind, maybe only like 10% or less of my Facebook friends are Bernie people. But they are just so visible. They are just so everywhere that, and the thing is, they think they're right. They think they're morally right. They think they're ethically right, and they think what they're doing is correct. And they don't even think about the consequence, and they've surrounded themselves in this echo chamber where they all, it's social proof, they all see each other doing it, and so they think it's the right thing. And the thing is, it's very easy to make a Bernie slogan, like, oh, people should, the fair share, $15 an hour, all this stuff that sounds good in a soundbite. But to argue against it takes, you have to get into a lot of detail to argue against these people. You can't counter that with just a simple sentence, or maybe you can, but I don't know what that would be. I'm a very verbose person. I'm not really a slogan type person. And I think most conservatives are like that. We're not the slogan people. The liberals are the slogan people. And I think it's been that way this whole time. But, so I'm worried, and we've already seen things from the liberals, like when the town halls pushing Obamacare back in 2010 or around that time were happening, 2009, 2010. They were getting unions to picket them as basically muscle to make sure that things went according to their plan. Does this sound familiar? Because it should. This is exactly what the SA was for. The SA in Germany, otherwise known as the Stormtroopers, were basically a political army, a political group of thugs who would intimidate and terrorize opponents of the Nazi Party. And the Bernie people, they're doing the E equivalent of this right now. But I think that we've seen examples of intimidation from unions and from other liberal groups, and I think that will only continue and grow in the Bernie Sanders administration, if such a thing exists, which won't. It won't in a million years, but if it did, we could see something like that start to arise. All the Occupy Wall Street people revere him as like a savior almost, and so anything, and they want to string up the bankers and hang them in off lampposts in Wall Street. They don't advocate for that, but that's what they want in their hearts. I should know. I used to be one of those people. I've renounced them, and so it's not a pretty picture. We could have Occupy Wall Street plus the unions plus all these liberal loudmouths. They could form some unofficial 21st century version of the SA. Just this big collective, this big herd that just intimidates and shuts down people. And I think it's horrifying, and I think it's shocking, and I think that Bernie has to be stopped. I think I've changed my position. Hillary Clinton is not the most dangerous person who could be president. It is Bernie Sanders, and we have to stop him. Now, he won't get out of the Democratic primary. The political machinery, including the media, is behind Hillary Clinton. As a side note, I find it beautifully poetic that the Bernie people are feeling a little bit, just the taste of what us conservatives have felt for so long from the media, because they are, the media, of course, is in the tank for Hillary, and since Hillary is such a terrible candidate and such a terrible person, the only way that they can make her look good is by just not talking about her, because any kind of attention is going to shine light on how terrible she is. And if they don't talk about Hillary, they can't talk about Bernie either, because that would put him in contrast with her and make him look better than her. So they just don't talk about Bernie either. And meanwhile, you have Donald Trump, who plays the media like a fiddle, and the Bernie people are just so outraged that their guy is not getting attention. It's like, well, hello, you mocked us when we said that we had a liberal media in this country for years, and now look at you. You're just getting the smallest taste of what we go through, and you're crying your little liberal eyes out. It's beautiful. But ultimately, at the end of the day, Bernie Sanders will not be the Democratic nominee, and he will not be president either. Hillary Clinton is going to beat him, and then she's going to lose to Ted Cruz. That's what I believe is going to happen. I might be wrong, but I'm not going to be. We'll come back to this video in 2017 and review it, or even at the end of this year. We'll come back to this in November and review how my prediction went. If we have President Hillary Clinton, God help us. But if we had President Bernie Sanders, we might as well just pack up our bags. As one final aside to this, you want to know what the world would look like if the Bernie people took over, if the Occupy Wall Street people took over? There's actually a brilliant metaphor for this in the movie The Dark Knight Rises, the final movie of the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy that came out in 2012. When Bane takes over Gotham and hands it over to the people, basically what results, the ensuing chaos, is exactly what would happen if Occupy Wall Street people, under the direction of, Bernie Sanders, takes over, That is what America would look like. It would look like Gotham when Bane took over. It would be a disaster. So, if you're into, watch that movie or watch it again with that in mind, and it's a perfect metaphor. But yeah, there we go. Don't vote for Bernie, folks. We can't afford this pirate in our White House. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of this episode. It was a lot of fun. I had a great time doing this. I was actually a little bit sleepy when I first started, and I didn't know whether I'd be able to keep this up, But I did, and I think that we had a pretty good episode. I enjoyed talking about this kind of stuff a lot, and we'll be definitely talking about a lot more presidential politics in this year, because after all, 2016 is a presidential election year. So we are going to have a lot of fun with that. But I want to, this show is called The All. It's not called Politics Weekly. We are going to dig deep. We are going to get to the root of things, because that's what I do. That's what we do. And in the spirit of that, next week we will have a themed episode. Unless I change my mind between now and then, and I don't think I will, we will have our first themed episode next week, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Excuse me. So, I want to say thank you once again for watching. I really appreciate all your viewership, and